Okay, we've got a lot to cover today, talking about Roman art and how it kind of has transitioned from that Greek period. We want to look at how architecture in particular has transitioned. Roman civilization had extremely modest beginnings. According to legend, the mythical king Romulus founded Roman civilization in 753 BCE. This was a society made up of lots of different people. It was a collection of mud huts clustered around the Palatine Hill near the Tiber River. Would grow into a powerful city-state, eventually into an empire. And of course, the Roman Empire was ginormous. Roman civilization was a multicultural civilization. It reflected an eclectic art. It was reflected in eclectic art, and we call it eclectic art because eclectic meaning it's a collection from this very broad range of civilization, this multicultural civilization. Roman society was practical. Much of the art was utilitarian or had a purpose it served. It wasn't just there to look at it. It had a function that it provided. Some of that function was propaganda to further their political agenda. Ancient Rome would be the vehicle by which ancient thought and art was carried into the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. And so one of the things that we want to look at is how, to this very day, from our system of government to how our city-states are laid out, cities and states, I should say, are laid out, every little bit of it, from laws to language to math to art, it all goes back to the Romans, and which got theirs a lot from the Greeks. They kind of all understand this. That's what we're looking at. The objectives in this lesson are to understand how the Greeks influenced the Romans, and essentially how the Romans influenced the rest of us. We're going to be looking at not just the art, but specifically the architecture of the time and how that's kind of reflected. And again, today we have lots of neoclassical architecture, which is architecture based in these Greek and Roman traditions. Roman history is generally divided into three parts: the Regal, the Republican period, and the Imperial period. And so when we look at those, I'm going to kind of take a look at those in another PowerPoint here. The Regal period is when the Romans really forged their identity. It was during this that they had the legendary Trojan prince, the son of a goddess. I mean, it was all, myth and legend back then. So we have these deep roots as Rome begins to kind of get its roots established and its stories told, if you will. And so one of the things that we see during this period that became important was that the Romans decided they were better off with Roman rule, but not necessarily in the hands of a single individual. And we start to see the beginnings of this representational government, if you will. In the second period in that Roman history, that Roman Republic dates vary a little bit, but it's then that the Romans begin to elect their governors and to a certain extent begin to choose and have representatives, if you will, in their as part of their government. And we'll see that it's not perfect yet. In the last century of the Republic, individual figures, including particularly Julius Caesar, began to dominate the political scene. It created problems for the proud Romans. This time the resolution led to the next form of government, which was the Principate. And the Principate we see form during this this last part of their the last sort of form of the this last little period in their formation. And it's during that late Republic period that we see changes in government led by Julius Caesar and Octavian or Augustus. The Republic getting replaced by the Principate. And then so in this Imperial Rome, we have about a 500-year time period where the exchange is sort of these one ruler after another. Every once in a while you got a military coup that kind of takes over. But we see these powerful leaders, but they were supported generally by like senates and that sort of thing. Not quite the type of government we got now, but a fairly good start. So they've got the dates here, and you can kind of see what artistically highlighted what the Coliseum, the Pantheon, Servian Wall. It's not really impressive, all that impressive to look at. We can kind of take a look. Pompeii, we've got these great works of art, these big murals that we see. Whenever we think about the influence of that Greek to Roman art, we immediately go to the Pantheon. The Pantheon made use of this Greek sort of influences, but brought in some of the stuff that only the Romans can do. Let's take a look at that. All right. Roman architecture. In the earliest days, Rome was essentially an Etruscan city. After the overthrow of the Etruscan monarchy in 509, Rome's uniqueness slowly began to emerge. When Rome General Marcellus brought back the treasure for art from the conquered Greek city of Syracuse, yada, 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 that's when it starts to really get its identity. And so we see they've got this one particular statue that we saw the wolf from that earlier, and then they add to it these the babies Romulus and Remus, and this is sort of that beginning story of understanding of where Rome gets its mythical beginnings. But we see one of the primary influences of Roman architecture, and that we see carried over from to this very day, is the invention and creation of concrete. It's not possible to overstate the importance and value of concrete. By having concrete, they were able to take what the Greeks did, and again, we're going to go back and look at the Pantheon really quick. They were able to take what the Greeks did, and that's have these really cool columns, and they still made use of the Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian columns and so forth. Still pediments, all the kind of same stuff we have from the Greeks, but they can do some different things. Domes were one of the main influences. You can't create a dome really easy with stones. Now, we do see that there are examples of stone-made domes, but they're very hard to get stones to lock and hold in place and create domes. And so one of the easy things that you can do, not necessarily easy, but one of the things that concrete allowed was much more flexibility in the use of materials and the things they could create. So we see the Pantheon with this use of the arch is a fantastic example of that Roman influence now kind of taking over that Greek architecture. Let's make sure I'm covering all the questions over here. Yeah, the earliest artistic identity of Rome, kind of based on the stealing of a lot of other stuff. Let's get this going. Next one. Sanctuary of Fortuna. This is the first monumental structure constructed with concrete. It was the Sanctuary of Fortuna at Pereneste. Good luck with that one. Inspired by the Hellenistic design, the Romans built a complex into a massive hillside. World War II bombing raids leveled the medieval structures, and you have to understand Greece, Italy, all these areas were devastated by war, not once but twice. And because of that, a lot of the architecture we have was damaged or destroyed, ruined. I got to study in Italy for a summer, and it was really interesting to go into some of these churches that had been destroyed during World War I and World War II. And in one particular little town, they had and this was in a little town just outside of Rome. The church had been leveled by bombing, and when they rebuilt it, the stained glass, they still had in the floor the saints that had been buried in the floors there, and so the base, the foundation of the structure was all original, and a lot of the stone at the bottom that survived was original. But the new stained glass windows that they put in were not like the original. Instead, they were reflective of the pains and hardship that town had gone through during World War II, and the stained glasses were replaced with German soldier images of German soldiers coming through and bashing, the citizens, and it was really interesting to see the stories told. But it was a neat kind of juxtaposition between that ancient Rome that we're looking at now versus the modern Rome, and sort of the trials and tribulations that a city that old goes through. Let's go on. Pompeii. This is going to be important. We're going to take a look at Pompeii. Pompeii provided a lot of historical knowledge. There's a lot left that we have to look at. So Republican period architectural finds at Pompeii are characteristic of Roman mentality and architectural innovation. The city was buried in tons of volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. Pompeii, along with other Roman towns, was frozen in time, almost perfectly preserved until the 18th century when the communities were discovered. Although Pompeii itself was originally an Oscan and later Samnite town, ethnic groups that Romans eventually conquered and absorbed, and there were tons of these. As Rome expanded, it absorbed everybody. Pompeii became a Roman town after it was made into a colony around 80 BCE. Laid out into a grid system, and again we see the Romans, and we talked a little bit about this previously, about and I can't remember the name of the emperor, escaping me, that required the rigid 90-degree angles, and we see that obviously expands into the modern era. The shape was irregular because it had to incorporate the existing streets. The center town was the form and Roman equivalent of the Greek agora. The focus of Pompeii's forum, like all Republican period towns, was a religious structure known as the Capitolum. Capitolium? A triple shrine for Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The Capitolium reflects multiple influences: the expected Etruscan design, the Greek Corinthian columns, the deep porches, of course, and all that Roman influence as well. Oh, let's go back. Sorry. The Basilica. This was housed, those were the courts. And again, we look at the influences of Greek to Roman, and we see that, the Greeks started this sort of system of the laws, but the Romans began to expand and create these systems. That's, again, kind of what we see in the modern era, this understanding of once you take these loose collection of city-states together, a government begins to form, laws begin to form, you begin to see these governments begin to kind of become more formal, if you will. The amphitheaters were huge. These were these big, enormous venues where lots of people obviously could pack in. But one of the neat things about them is they were also often very reflective of the environment around, built into the hillsides. If you ever travel over to Richmond, Kentucky at Eastern EKU, there's an amphitheater built into a hillside. Looks very much like this. It's really neat. Had the seating capacity over 20,000, similar to a modern football stadium. Think about that. I think that'd be a small. I think what Kroger Field is 60,000, so you can kind of get an idea. Not quite as big as our college football fields, but pretty good size. Roman painting, among the remains of Pompeii were these great murals that they had, these frescoes. There are different styles. We recognize different styles in these portraits. And so we'll look at first style. First style dates back to the 2nd century BCE. The Greek origin is easily recognizable because the walls are painted to resemble expensive marble. And so again, instead of having expensive marble, and even in the day, marble was not easy to get. Limestone is almost always oft, I should say, one of the more readily available stones. The second style, the idea was to expand the rooms and the illusion of a three-dimensional space. There was cult and its practices is relatively unknown, except as limited to women. Males in the frescoes are often mythological figures, Dionysus and the three satyrs. The painting has a ledge on which the figures are painted. It's the linear perspective and the idea that everything is kind of created on this flat, even plane. They don't really have understanding yet of depth perspective. When we talk about linear perspective, we're thinking that everything's sort of on a flat two-dimensional space. Even though we see some people kind of tucked behind others, we don't get that sense of depth and proportion, scale, that sort of thing. In the third style, however, you can kind of see they begin to kind of broach on that three-dimensionality. If you look back, you see some of these lines that show going back into space. We're going to see the third style. The wall painting dating from about 15 BCE is recognized by delicate linear decoration, monochromatic, meaning one color, essentially. The lack of depth of perspective continued, but you can see there are some beginnings of depth in that perspective, just a little bit. When we get into the fourth style, as you might have predicted, the pendulum of Roman taste swung back to the desire of illusionary depth, not simply a rebirth of the second style, but in the fourth style, this is a new treatment. Motifs painted on monochromatic backgrounds are reminiscent of the third style, but now there are framed views that go past the wall. So you can kind of see sort of how they've got these almost framed in. The fourth style is evident in this room of the house in this place in Pompeii that I'm not going to try to pronounce. Name comes from the mythological scene involving Ixion on the back wall. The generally unrelated illusionistic scenes combined with delicate ornamentation show the evolution of the characteristics of previous styles. So the ornamentation, again, think about sort of the pomp and circumstance of the art they're creating, the illusion of marble, these very ornamental designs that don't really provide anything other than just kind of eye candy. When we look at the portraits of the time, this is a portrait of a husband and a wife, I believe. Portrait of husband and wife, yeah. His second wife holds a stylus, writing tablet, standard Roman marriage pose. Both these elements indicate their educated status. Painting represents the same direct realism as seen in Republican period sculpture. A lot of these paintings we see are going to be reflective of the subject's place in society. Here they mention they're educated. There might be Roman senators, government people, essentially. Roman Republican sculpture, early Roman sculpture, better than any of the art form, exemplifies the character of Republican Rome. This style reflects the new attitude towards portraiture and uncompromised realism and directness. And so we kind of remember at the end of that Greek art, we looked at how they were beginning in this naturalism. And so immediately the Romans pick up on this and carry that same tradition through. We see lots of that very realistic, direct approach. A Roman aristocrat or patrician carrying two portrait heads of his ancestors is a subject of a purposeful literal representation, vastly different from the heroic representations of ancient Greek. So, again, the ancient Greeks were all about heroic. We got more naturalistic towards the very end, and again, the Romans carry that naturalism into their artistic representations. The overall work is still very elaborate, though. We see the folds in the toga, the original style, lie in the Roman custom of making an exact portrait mask of the deported loved ones in wax. And so they would very often literally cast the face, cast the head, so that the portraits were perfect. These portrait masks would be preserved within wooden shrines in the home and then transported later into funeral rites to perpetuate the name and character of their line. The realistic rendering of the Republican sculpture also applied to Republican leaders such as Julius Caesar, Marcus Tullius Cicero. They had cool names, isn't it? All right, let's get through. Early Imperial Art under Augustus. Shoo. Augustus. That's a lot to talk about with Augustus. During the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic suffered increasing civil unrest, which ultimately culminated in 3 separate civil wars. Order was restored when Octavian, the adopted son of nephew of Julius Caesar, rose to power over the Roman state. And so, no longer was that power in the Senate. It's back to that emperor centrally located. Given the title of Augustus, the Reverend one, Octavian was. This marked the beginning of that Roman Imperial Period. We want to kind of look at, under the consolidated power, Rome experienced an era of order and peace. We know this as that Pax Augusta, the Augustan peace. It lasted over 200 years, the next 200 years. And you had lots of public works, lots of things going on. Forums, temples, the basilicas, baths, amphitheater, roads, bridges, aqueducts. And so all of these things, expand Rome's power and influence. When we look specifically at the sculpture in the Augustan age had a striking new look. The aged realism of the Republican period was replaced with realistic idealism. This is a beautiful representation of it. You can see that very realistic look, but it's sort of still natural. The poses that he's held is very natural stance. That sort of juxtaposition with the turn of the body, the leg bent, the arm up. Augustus gained control of the Roman state in his early 30s and reigned into his 70s, but his representation was consistently young. He never wanted to see him get old. In this sculpture, he represents a youthful, heroic emperor with a strong political comment. Julius Caesar claimed to be the direct descendant of Venus, though the mythological patriarch of the Roman race, Aeneas. After his death, Caesar was also deified and worshipped as a god as well. Augustus never claimed to be a god, but he kind of had that leftover feeling, if you will. Altar of Peace was Augustan propaganda to celebrate and the celebration of Augustan peace was dedicated to the birthday of his wife Livia. The altar is surrounded by ornate enclosure. The outside was a public face of the monument. And so we're just going to kind of look at some of those Roman differences. If you'll look, there is so much art going on the outside of this building. We don't see that in the Greek. The Greek buildings maintained all of theirs according to the top of the pediments and that sort of thing. But we see in the relief sculptures continuing on the sides of the building. We see lots of various figures. The entire sides of these things were often covered in these types of epic stories being told through these relief sculptures. We're not going to get into exactly what all of them are because we're running out of time. On the east side or back of the enclosure has two panels. And again, let's take a look at those relief panels. When we're talking about relief, it's still a two-dimensional thing, but we see that relief. This is fairly high relief. The babies, if you will, are almost completely in 3 dimension coming out to us. The heads of the figures are almost in 3 dimensions. That's, again, that high example of that high relief. Let's get to two facts about each of these things. The Coliseum, known as the Flavian Amphitheater, was the biggest mark of the Flavians. Let's take a look here at the Coliseum because this is one of the coolest things on earth. This is the Coliseum. If you've never been there, go see the Coliseum. It's fantastic. I guess you can just drive over there. But it's magnificent. Huge. It had ceilings, or not to say ceilings, but roof that could be extended out over to provide shade, sort of protection from rain, mostly shade protection. The whole thing could be flooded. They could bring in boats and have battles in the middle of the thing with water in it. It was really an amazing thing. Let's see. A couple of interesting facts you may not want to know. Let's see. I'm going to pick out a couple really good ones here. I don't like any of their facts. All right, we'll go with them. Let's see. Oh, a size 16-story building. There you go. That's a good fact. The exterior facade is divided into 4 bands, the lower 3 of which have arches framed in the engaged columns, with those engaged columns. And we see those, again, if you've ever built this in Minecraft, which I recommend you do, it's really cool. Understanding that those arches, again, because they had to use the concrete, were a lot easier to achieve. So arches were part of that domes that were that Roman influence over that Greek architecture. There are the three so-called classic orders of architecture still represented: the Doric, the Ionic, the Corinthian. The highest level, with the Corinthian being the most ornate. The inside structure there was once seating for about 50,000. The extensive seating, again, that's close to as big as Kroger Field there out on Nicholasville Road. Before the floor was once waiting rooms for the gladiators, cages for the animals, and complex machinery that would allow combatants to rise up from the floor below into the center of the arena. It was pretty interesting. Nope, we got to go back and do... Oh, the trade show. Yeah, we're going to do next. Sorry. we look at the first emperor of the High Empire, Nerva, only lived about 2 years and was succeeded by Trajan. The form of Trajan is what we're going to kind of look at here. Where are we at? The form which highlighted Trajan's victory over the Dacians included a vast colonnaded plaza, followed by the massive basilica, libraries, and monumental column here. And so you can see these huge columns. After the emperor's death, the temple for the defied Trajan was erected in the end of the forum, but it was not part of the original design. When we look at, I really don't even love that as an example. It's a terrible picture of it on top of everything else. But you can kind of see the column of Trajan here. You can see the 125 feet tall. It was once topped with a bronze statue of Trajan. It was destroyed, of course, in the Middle Ages, and the column is now capped with a statue of St. Peter. Let's look at the Pantheon. I can't really get through this stuff quick enough. The Pantheon, again, a couple of interesting facts you want to know about it. Is a temple for all the gods, originally destroyed by fire, the completely redesigned, rebuilt by under Hadrian. The Pantheon is considered one of the most important and revolutionary buildings in the history of architecture, and we recognize that again, one of the first earliest uses of the big dome. Colonnaded porch was a nod to the tradition. Everything else about the Pantheon was novel. Behind the porch was a huge, rounded concrete structure covered by a hemispherical dome, which is 140 feet in diameter. The distance from the dome to the floor is also 140 feet, making a perfect intersection of two circles. The construction of the Pantheon was an example of engineering innovation. The concrete used to build the lower portion was made with heavier stones so that the lower portion could bear heavier load. The successive levels were then constructed with concrete mixed lighter stones so that the weight of the wall of the dome would not cause the structure to cave in on itself. It's an amazing structure. We're really going to run out of time here. Column of Marcus Aurelius. Two things you should know about it. Pick something out of here. The podium of the monument is quite well adorned. The backside contained a dedicatory inscription, while the front showed he and his wife. The strong classical influences are evident. Proportional figures, single ground line, and again we talk about that linear perspective is represented by a single ground line. Divine personifications, male in the lower left is personification of the Campus Martius, a historical reflection of Rome, and the male is personification of Rome itself. Figures of squat do not appear to be a single baseline, but floating around in the space. This was kind of a breakaway. This break from the tradition is the abstract idea of space, which soon become the norm. This would kind of bring us into the next. The baths of the... Goodness, there's just way too much to cover in this thing. One of the many projects that emperors commissioned to gain public favor were these baths where people could come and kind of think of like a big spa type thing. These recreational centers had rich gardens, exercise grounds, lecture halls, libraries, restaurants, swimming pools, and baths. The largest ever constructed were commissioned by Caracalla and covered well over 40 acres. Great big things. And last but not least, the Arch of Constantine. Let's look at the Arch of Constantine. The Age of Constantine, after the resignation of Diocletian, I would have not made it in Rome. Rome again suffered civil disorder as rival tetrarchs fought for control of the empire. In 312 BCE, Constantine, the son of the Diocletian Caesar of the West, invaded Italy and engaged and defeated the Maxentius, the son of Diocletian Augustus of the West, in a pivotal battle at the Milvian Bridge. The victory attributed to Christ. We see this influence of this Christianity and into the system of governments even. Christianity was recognized as an official religion of the Roman world, also marks the beginning of the Middle Ages, not necessarily known for the most thoughtful period in the world history. Age of Constantine continued. We'll look at the Arch of Constantine quickly, and then we'll wrap up for today. The Arch of Constantine, which was erected right next to the Coliseum, like the Arch of the Septimius Severus, has a triple passageway and evident of the melding of the culture and religious shifts. And again, we see those archways. We see the columns, again, that Greek influence, but we see those Roman influences what the arch has brought into this as well. The relief panels from the arch were taken from the earlier monuments of Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, and the heads of the old emperors were recarved to resemble Constantine. Not quite a god, remember, but pretty proud of himself. All right. Identify himself the good emperors, Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's lesson. We're going to probably do things a little different with assessment coming up. You've got DBAs coming soon, and we're likely going to have a little quiz that you'll take over the Roman art specifically. Thanks for playing. Have a great day.